And I think what we've heard a lot of is you really need to have boots on the ground. You've got to have somebody in Vietnam who understands Vietnam and in Indonesia who understands Indonesia, because the laws are different, the culture is different, how to do deals is different. And so what is, in terms of looking at it as a market and where you might put your money as an LP, you know, I guess you would have to look at Southeast Asia and decide whether or not it really makes sense to treat it as a region or not. And if you're not going to treat it as a region, then, you know, I think it does kind of get lost in, you know, sort of the behemoths of China and India. I was at a conference in the U.S. about a month ago on PE, and there was a day on Asia, and, you know, Asia was China and India. I think, you know, Indonesia got a mention as maybe being, you know, the new iron brick, but for the most part, it was all China and India all the time. And so I think globally, that's still a perception, and maybe it's changing on the ground here, and certainly maybe with sort of local LPs who understand things. But for the huge checks that get written, I still think it's really China and India, and even there, more China.
Yeah, I think I'd add to that. The other side of this is the supply of private equity is still tiny against the supply of corporate debt from the banking system. And actually, you know, if you look at China, then SOE lending, or sorry, the state banks lending to the corporate sector is mainly into SOEs. In other words, actually, private companies in China, relatively speaking, struggle to obtain capital because the SOEs get preference, which is part of what provides the private equity opportunity. In Southeast Asia, my impression, I'm not a technical banker, is that actually there's quite deep pools of domestic liquidity in most of the markets in which we operate. So if you take Thailand, for instance, there's huge liquidity within the Thai banking system at the moment, which crowds out the typical private equity opportunity. And you get that repeated in quite a lot of the markets around Asia. Now, you sometimes get blips when domestic liquidity is tight, and that actually provides an opportunity for private equity. But you know, if you look at the supply of capital broadly to the corporate sector, I suspect private equity is sort of less than 5%, maybe 2 or 3%. And so small changes in domestic liquidity can completely crowd out the opportunity for private equity. And I've been here for almost 15 years, and for most of that time, the domestic banking community has been our biggest competitor, not other private equity guys. And I think that point's sometimes overlooked when people look at the supply side or they look at GDP rates of growth. We have got fundamentally a different sort of banking system in most of these markets compared to China or India.
It's very similar to Southeast Europe, where I understand it before the crisis.
I think we're kind of running out of time. Maybe I'd like to close off with just running through the panel. Just give us a brief snapshot of where you think the opportunity set is going to be in the next 12 to 18 months.
I think for the next 12 to 18 months, I mean, I personally see a lot of opportunities in Indonesia. And I would like to see something in Thailand, because I think it's an interesting part this period of time. So,
well, for true control transactions, for buyouts, I would say I still think it's Japan, Australia, Korea, China more than Southeast Asia. And to the extent Southeast Asia, I think it's Singapore stands out as a relatively easy place to do buyouts. I think Indonesia is clearly the investment destination. I mean, for our practice, I'd say, half our practice is focused on Indonesia at any given time, but it's not necessarily kind of the typical buyout transactions that you would think of. It's minority stakes, it's joint ventures, it's different kinds of ways to get in and make those investments.
Yeah, I think I'd echo that point that Indonesia is certainly, for us, a big focus for the next couple of years. But I wouldn't expect that to be a strong focus from a buyout point of view. And I'd characterize the buyout opportunity in Southeast Asia as being a little different. I think it's more linked to generational change. And that's not country specific. But it is actually going to be based around not, I hope, the investment banking transactions where the prices are ramped, but where you're actually trying to put solutions together for families or conglomerates that need to pass assets through to professional ownership?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is almost a structural one across Southeast Asia, because it's slightly controversial here, but it is Southeast Asia, as we said, is a collection of relatively small markets, with perhaps the one exception of Indonesia, and they're small and relatively protected. And I actually think the levels of fundamental competition in many of these markets is relatively low, and therefore have plenty of decent but not world-class businesses. Businesses that are strong in a domestic context but not in an international context. So relatively few that I think have the scale and the quality and the scale of opportunity to really make them exciting control opportunities. And then on the other, you've got lots of big groups who, again, don't feel the full force of competition in the way they do in the West, and therefore can afford to have extremely diversified business models, running a big portfolio of, okay but moderately managed businesses, and a model that wouldn't survive in the West because you'd just be competed away by other nimbler, stronger competitors, and it's that kind of pressure that drives divestments and portfolio reorganizations and buyout opportunities to go in and acquire an unloved, sort of neglected subsidiary, and for the buyout guys to do their alchemy on that and to turn it around. And I just don't see those pressures yet impinging across Southeast Asia to create the flows of opportunities that'll really help drive the market. And I think the key catalyst to that will be creation of a more meaningful sort of single market across the region, to open it up more and to allow winners to emerge and to force people to think hard about the nature of the portfolios that the corporates manage here.
Sandy?
Buyout potential? Definitely, beyond any doubt, gotta be Myanmar. Just kidding. I think, and Brunei. I would echo the other panelists, and I think Indonesia, being the largest economy in Southeast Asia, is transitioning now, and you see a lot of not yet the Singapore style of buyout, but rather a buyout that you would do together with a local partner. Now it's gonna get complicated because you got competitions from conglomerates behaving like private equity, with the typical structures, bank debts, mezzanine, and the hedge funds financing, which is make it a formidable competitor for traditional private equity like ourselves. In terms of sectors, I think natural resources, we will see a different kind of wave of buyouts on natural resources, not the buy cheap, sell high type, but rather consolidations. Secondly, it has to be in the consumer sector, the domestic economy, the domestic consumption, household consumptions sectors that would see some of these opportunities coming up.
Well, great. Thank you all for that. I, kind of laugh inside because a story comes up in my mind, just as it is with mezzanine and buyout. There's a book by George Ross, who was the chief negotiator for Donald Trump, and in his front introduction, it was quite funny. He says there's this guy who's very rich. He's got twin sons. One's an incurable optimist and one's an incurable pessimist. So he said, I got to fix this. So on their birthday, he buys the incurable pessimist a 5-speed racing bike, $5,000 Japanese bike, and the incurable optimist, 2 buckets of shit, and he puts them in their rooms. And so he goes and check in on the guy with the speeding bike and says, how do you like your present? He says, well, I love it, but actually, you know what? I'm going to break my leg. I'm going to go to the playground. Some bully's going to beat me up. What are you thinking, buying me this piece of crap? He was like, well, that didn't work so well. He goes into the incurable optimist room, and the guy's singing and he's digging and he's rolling around in the shit. And he's saying, son, what are you doing? He says, well, with all this shit, there's got to be a pony somewhere in here. So with that, I'd like to take this chance to applaud the panel of speakers here.